This sermon was recorded at the Church of Christ, Northwest Arkansas. We are Christians seeking to worship God in spirit and in truth, according to the New Testament. Come worship with us Sunday mornings at 10:30 at 1708 Elm Springs Road in Springdale, Arkansas.
It's good to be back with you all this morning. I appreciate all of you for being here and appreciate the prayers on my behalf. And it's my prayer that the things we study will be in accordance to God's will this morning and also be useful to you, and that you can learn from the Scriptures and you can apply it to your lives to the best of your ability, and that we can all improve our walk as we continue on together. For a little while today, I want to talk about a historical event that happened between David and Goliath. Now, most of us basically know what the story happened, that Goliath was a giant. David was a small young man. David killed the giant with a sling and stone. We've read this story since we were kids. We read it to our kids now in watered-down children's books. And if you're like me, I'm sure you probably have lost sight on how great of an impact this event really was. We really water this story down a lot. We fail to look at what really happened. We tend to use the analogy of David and Goliath in a lot of different settings, mainly sports events. That we use that today to talk about an underdog versus a powerhouse. And that's technically true, but it really waters down the whole story. And when we do this, everyone knows what is meant when we say David versus Goliath. But for a little while today, I want to look back at the historical records that we have in the Scripture to see what really happened. Why has this one battle between David and Goliath captured the attention of people for thousands of years? Why do we still look back on it now when this was just one thing that happened? It was just one day, one battle. But it was so big and such a great event, we still look back at it thousands of years later and we still talk about what happened. So this morning, we're going to look at what really happened in this battle, what we can learn from it, how it builds our faith today as Christians, and ultimately how we can apply it to our own lives. So if you have your Bibles with you this morning, turn to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 17. You'll need to bring your own scriptures I will have some of the scriptures on the PowerPoint here, but we're going to spend a lot of time in 1 Samuel chapter 17. So if you'll go ahead and turn there, we'll begin in verse 1. And the first thing we're going to look at is the battle setting itself. So what was going on? If I can get this to work. There we go. So we're going to look at the battle setting itself. 1 Samuel chapter 17, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Socho, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Socho and Azekah and Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them." So here is Ephes-dammim. This is the modern day view of the area that they were at. This is what's called Ephes-dammim. Now it probably didn't look quite like this a couple thousand years ago. There's been some agricultural developments and stuff like that. But this is the area. So what you have is you've got the Israelites on one side, you've got this valley of Elah in the middle, and then you've got the Philistines on the other side. So this is where they were battling at a couple thousand years ago, or a few thousand years ago. So this is at the valley of Elah where they at. Now let's continue on in verse 4, and we're going to read verse 4 through 11, and we're going to hear about Goliath. Beginning in verse 4, it says, "And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and he said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants of Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. All right, so here we have Goliath here. Now let's look a little bit about Goliath. Let's see some of the characteristics that 1 Samuel tells us. So if we look at this man Goliath, he's called the Philistine giant. He's a Goliath of Gath, and Gath is where he came from. That's the area where he resided. It says that his height there in verse 4, 4, his height was 6 cubits in a span. Now most scholars look at cubits in a couple different ways. Some people will say a cubit is 18 inches. Some people will say a cubit is roughly 24 inches. How they come up with that is they take your arm and they look from the point of your elbow to the point of your fingertips, and that is roughly a cubit. That was their unit of measurement for a cubit. So he's 6 cubits and a span. Now a span, they would take a hand and they would go from the edge of the fingertip of the thumb to the edge of the fingertip of the pinky, and that is what's called a span. It's roughly 6 inches, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less for some people. So when you look at that, 6 cubits in a span, we would roughly translate that to somewhere between 9 foot 6 inches tall to 11 feet tall. That's a pretty tall guy. So when you look at the historical records through the world that we have today, not including scriptures, they'll say the tallest man that ever lived was a man up in Illinois, I believe, and I think they said he was 8 foot 1 inches tall. And that's the tallest man that we have on record. Now when you look at the scriptures tell us differently. Goliath was somewhere between 9 foot 6 to 11 feet tall. So if we take somewhere in the middle, we can say this guy's roughly 10 foot tall. Now if you think about that, he would not be able to walk in this room without ducking. These ceilings are 8 foot tall. So he would have to hunch over pretty tall just to go over and walk in this building. His weight would be roughly 400 pounds. Now something that I looked up just a little bit ago is we look at someone named Shaq, right? Shaquille O'Neal. We look at him and say, like, man, this guy's huge. If you've ever seen Shaquille O'Neal in person, if you've ever seen pictures of him, this is a big guy. Well, Shaq is 7 foot 1. So Goliath is 3 foot taller than Shaq. He makes Shaq look like a little kid, right? He's a big guy. Shaq also weighed 325 pounds. Now Goliath is 10 foot tall, so his weight was probably more than 400 pounds, I'm guessing. But this is a really big guy, okay? So he's coming out and he's challenging the Philistine army. Now the next thing we look at is in verse 5 and 6, it says he has a coat of mail. Now if you look at that picture over there on the right, the coat of mail would be what goes across his chest. It's basically metal strips that they interweave together, and you've probably seen it in some old war movies and stuff like that. It's the metal strips that they have that covers their front, and it keeps things from piercing them, right? It's protection. Well, his would have weighed approximately 150 pounds because it says it weighed 5,000 shekels of brass. When you look up the 5,000 shekels of brass, you convert it to the weights that we have, it's roughly 150 pounds. Now this would just be to cover his front, his chest area. Be 150 pounds. It also says he has a helmet, greaves, and a target of brass. Now we know what a helmet is. Greaves would basically be like shin guards. That's what's covering like the lower portion of his legs. So that's what greaves are. And a target of brass that goes between his shoulders, that's what covers the back. So it's a lot more of a solid piece of metal. So when you think about all the armor that he had a helmet, the coat of mail, he had leg protection, he had his back protection, he had a shield bearer, someone else to go out in front of him just to carry his shield and go into battle. He had a lot of armor and protection as we would look at that. The next thing we see is he said he had a spear. Now this spear, it said it was like a weaver's beam. When you look up what that weaver's beam is, they basically take a vine and they wrap it around this long spear all the way down. And the intention for that is it's intended to throw. And basically the concept, if you think about a football, right, you throw a football and it spirals. The reason why you want that football to spiral is for accuracy and velocity. Well, they did the same thing back in the day with these spears. They would have this vine that would wrap around so they could throw it. Now, this guy's spear, this had an 18-pound iron head on the front end of it. So you think about a solid piece of iron that's huge, about the size of a watermelon, and it's iron, and it weighs 18 pounds, and that's on the end of this spear that he's going to throw at somebody. It also would have been roughly 26 feet long. When you think about 26 feet, think about roughly this wall over here to that wall over there. That's about 26 feet. And this guy's going to throw this thing at you. So this spear was massive. Okay, the total weight of this spear would have been about 37 pounds. So he had a lot of armor, he had a lot of protection, and he also had weapons. This one weapon was a spear. He also had another weapon, and that weapon was a sword. It's described in 1 Samuel chapter 21 as one of a kind. 1 Samuel chapter 21, reading verse 8 and 9, it says, And David said unto Ahimelech, Is there not here under thy hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah. Behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is none other save that here. And David said, There is none like that, give it me. David described this sword of the Philistine giant as one of a kind. There's no other sword ever that's going to be like the sword of this Philistine giant. And if you imagine that, you've got this 10-foot tall guy, you've got this huge spear, he's probably going to have a pretty big sword that most people, the average Joe, probably couldn't even pick up. This is a big sword. It's one of a kind, and it was preserved as a trophy, as a remembrance. After David killed Goliath, they took his sword and they kept it as a remembrance. So it is a one-of-a-kind sword. Now Goliath was also known as a man of war. If you look in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 33, it says Saul describes him, and he describes him as a man of war from his youth. This guy, he was trained up for battle. From very early age, from a young guy, he was trained up that he was ready to go to battle, and he's ready to kill some people. And he happens to just be 10 foot tall. This is a big guy. So if we also look in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 16, we see what Goliath was doing. It says he challenged the Israelites day and night for 40 days. There in verse 16 it says, The Philistine drew near morning and evening, presenting himself 40 days. So for 40 days long, this Philistine giant, he goes out in this valley, he leaves his army, and he goes by himself to challenge the Israelite army. And he does this twice a day for 40 days. And not a single time would anybody else in the Israelite army go challenge this guy. Now remember what was happening and what this challenge was. Goliath said, Send you out a man to fight me. If I win, you're going to be our servants. And if he wins, we'll be your servants. What Goliath was saying is this is going to be a one-on-one battle, and bring me your best, and winner takes all. So this was a big deal. Right? This wasn't just any random fight. This was someone going against this 10-foot tall guy, prepared from battle from his youth, fully armored up, had these weapons that were one of a kind, and they were supposed to send just one person to go fight this guy. And the one person to go fight this guy, he had the entire weight of the Israelite nation on his shoulders. Because if he lost, the whole army lost. That was the deal. If he won, the whole army won. So that was the challenge, and he issued this challenge for 40 days, day and night. So 80 times he went out and issued this challenge. Not a single one was willing to step up and go against him. So that's a little bit about Goliath. Now let's see where David enters the scene. So if we look at David, we're going to look at him as the Israelite shepherd. Now let's go back to 1 Samuel 17, and let's read verses 12 through 22. It says, Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the name of his 3 sons that went to battle were Eliab the firstborn, and the next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp of thy brethren. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left his sheep with the keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the hosts were going forth to fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. Okay, so let's pause right there for a minute. So here we have David where he enters the scene. The only reason David even went to this battle site to begin with is because his father Jesse told him to check on his 3 older brothers. So David was sent by his father. He was the youngest of 8 sons. So David had 7 older brothers. He was the youngest. Now the 3 oldest of his older brothers, they were in this battle. So David's father, Jesse, sent him to go check on his brothers. So take them some food, make sure your brothers are doing okay, take their pledge, and then bring it back. That's the only reason David went to begin with. He wasn't there to battle. He wasn't there to see the war. He wasn't there to do anything. He just went to go check on his brothers, do as his father commanded. Now let's look at some facts that we know about David. So David, most people estimate his height was to be roughly 5'3" to 5'6" tall. We're known from the scriptures that it says he's small in stature. So he's 5'3" to 5'6" is what most people roughly believe. His weight would have been roughly 120 to 140 pounds. And most people believe at this time, during when he went to battle against Goliath, he would have been roughly 20 years old. Now, a lot of the kids' storybooks you read, it says he's a young boy. He wasn't really a young boy. He was a young man. He was roughly about 20 years old. So here we can take this, what we know about Goliath, roughly 10 feet tall, over 400 pounds, versus David, 5'3", roughly half the height of Goliath, and roughly a fourth of the weight of Goliath. He's quite little compared to Goliath. All of us would be quite little compared to Goliath, but David was even really little. So David was going to this battle in order to just take care of his brothers and see how they were doing. David was not a man of war. David's occupation was he was a keeper of the sheep. He was a shepherd. His whole job was to go out and follow the sheep around, to herd them, to make sure that they were getting plenty to eat, try to keep them safe. But he was not a man of war. Remember, Goliath was trained up from war from his youth. David was not. David was not there to battle. So when David gets there, he sees Goliath defying God. Now let's go ahead and read that. So let's continue on in verse 23. 1 Samuel 17, beginning in verse 23. It says, "And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words which David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And all the men of Israel said, Have you seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why comest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left a few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and thy naughtiness of thy heart, for thou hast come down that thou mightest see us the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner, and the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he's a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. And David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. All right, there's a lot that we can bring out in this set of scriptures here, but we see that David sees Goliath defying the armies of the living God. And the first thing that we got to remember is all the Israelites, they were afraid of this Goliath. He was doing this for 40 days, day and night. And not a single one of them was willing to go sacrifice themselves to go fight this guy. Every single one of them were afraid. David sees it and is like, what's this guy going on? All the Israelites were saying, look at this giant. He's going to kill everybody. He's going to wipe out the army. David's response in verse 26 is, who is this guy? Who is this Philistine that he's going to defy the armies of the living God? David wasn't afraid of this guy. So David stepped up. In verse 32, we see where David went and he saw that this guy was defying the armies of God, And he said, who's this guy? I'll go fight him. Y'all can all be afraid if you want to, but I'm going to go take care of business and go do what needs to be done. So that's exactly what he went to do. Now remember what the challenge was. It was a one-on-one winner-take-all. So he had some naysayers. First he had his naysayer, which is his brother. His brother in verse 28 says, what are you doing? You're just coming down here to see the battle, and I know your pride and the naughtiness of your heart. Remember, his brother said that in verse 28. Well, then when he went and told Saul, I'll go kill this Philistine, imagine Saul's perspective at this time. Saul's the king, and say, okay, if we send this young guy out who has no training, he has no weaponry, he has nothing, and he's going to go out and fight against this guy. If he loses, we all lose, because that's the agreement. We're all going to be the servants of the Philistines. So he had to overcome these naysayers, and he had to convince the king there in verse 34 through 37 that he was able to go do it. And how he convinced the king was he said, I've killed both a lion and I killed a bear. And it wasn't me that killed him, but God killed him for me. And he just used me as a way to do that. So he had to go and he fought this battle, and he had to convince the king in order to let him go do that. And now this was a very risky thing that they were going to go do. So the next step we see is that David prepares for battle. If we read down in verse 38 through 40, it says, and Saul armed David with his armor, and he put his helmet of brass upon his head, and he also armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling which was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So now Saul, once David convinces Saul to go to this battle, Saul's like, okay, well, I'm at least going to try to set you up so you have somewhat of a chance, all right? I'm going to give you some armor. I'm going to give you my sword. Now this was the king. The king was given his own armor and his own sword to David to go into this battle. When you look at the king, Saul, it says that he stood head and shoulders above all the others in Israelite. So Saul was kind of a big guy too. He would have been a lot bigger than David. Basically, his armor would not have fit David. And David's not used to wearing this. He's not a man of battle. He's not going to go in with a sword and with all this armor and be able to do it. So David just puts him off. It's like, yeah, I don't need that. I can't go fight with this. So instead, David goes and picks up 5 stones out of the brook. Now imagine what Saul is thinking of at this time. So he goes and picks up 5 stones and puts off of his armor and puts off of his things. Imagine Saul in the armor's perspective as he's going to do that. You got this young man that just goes and picks up 5 stones, like, I'll take care of this. I'll go kill this Philistine. And then you've got Saul, it's like, what are we doing? He's going to go out, he's going to die, and then we're all going to die. But he still went. Now the key thing that David had that he knew and that all the other people in Israel failed to remember is David had the Lord on his side. And he told Saul that in verse 37. It says, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of this Philistine. And he's going to kill this Philistine for me. David knew that he had the greatest weapon of all time. He had the greatest protection of all time, and that was God. He didn't need all this physical, earthly protection and armor that the other people had. So he goes to battle. And then let's pick that up in verse 41. In verse 41, it says, and the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. When the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, thou comest to me with sword, and with spear, and with shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and with spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted, and he ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and he took thence a stone and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way of Shaaraim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. So here we see the battle. So a lot of things that we can point out to the battle. When we first see that, the first thing that we see is that Goliath was offended by David. His response when he saw this young man come out, no weaponry, no armor, no nothing. He saw this young boy come, and Goliath said, am I a dog that you're going to send this guy to come fight me? He's like, basically Goliath saying, bring it on. You come on out, and I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to feed your body to the fowls of the air and the beasts of the earth. Now David heard that, and I think if anybody else would have heard that, any of the Israelite army would have heard that, they would have turned and ran. But David's response was he tried to warn Goliath what was about to happen. He warned him that God was on his side. And he said, you come to me with sword and spear. You've got all this weaponry, but I come to you in the name of God. God's going to kill you. And after God kills you, then everybody's going to see there is a God in Israel. He tried to give him a warning, and Goliath didn't take that warning. Goliath then went to battle. He was ready to go fight. And he was leaning upon his own strength and own understanding to go kill David. But David was leaning upon the strength and understanding of God. Now, when he saw Goliath running, I want you to think about this perspective. You've got this 10-foot guy full of armor. He's got the sword. He's got the spear. And he is now running towards David. And David's seeing this huge guy come towards him. What's David's response? He runs right back at him. It's like, let's go. Let's bring it on. So David, this young guy, he takes off and he runs towards Goliath. And it says that in verse 28. It says he ran to the battle. He wasn't timid. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't tiptoeing around it. He was taking it head on. And he was there to go. The next thing we see is David takes one stone out of his pouch. He slung it and the giant fell. It says that stone sunk into the giant's forehead. I don't know how hard you got to throw a stone, but that's pretty hard to sink into someone's forehead and then for him to fall face down. So one stone, one act of courage, one moment of faith, and the giant fell. And that's what we see in this battle. Now, after the giant fell, of course, we see that he didn't have a sword. So David told him, like, I'm going to cut your head off and I'm going to feed it to the fowls of the air. But he didn't have a sword. He didn't have a way to do that. So he goes, stands upon Goliath's body that's now face down in the earth, takes out Goliath's sword, and cuts his head off with his own sword. Now, what happens when the rest of the Israelite army saw that? Well, they were inspired. After they see that this huge giant just fell from this young man, now the whole Israelite army were inspired, and they go and they chase the Philistine army, and they whip them, and they kill them. So this is the battle that we see, that this act of courage and this obedience inspired the rest of the Israelites. So this is the historical reference we see. Now, we've gone into a lot more detail, and we can see this was a lot bigger event than we read about in the storybooks. This was a big deal. And this really happened. I think a lot of times we hear about these stories and we think about it, that it is just a story, that it's almost make-believe. This was not make-believe. This happened. This was a historical event, and this is something that we can learn from. So the next thing I want to look at are what are some lessons that we can learn from this event? Well, the first lesson is that David had confidence in the Lord to deliver him. It says there in verse 37, and David said, Jehovah that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and Jehovah shall be with thee. So David, he knew from past experience, God has been with him his whole life. God has been there. He's protected him. He's helped him out of the lion, out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear. David looked back at those past experiences and said, God has always been with me, and God's going to be with me on this one too. So he had full confidence in the Lord that he will deliver him. And it also reminds us in Psalms chapter 18 what David said, Psalms 18 beginning in verse 2, Jehovah is my strength and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock. I will trust in him. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my high tower. I will call on Jehovah, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. So the lesson that we learn here is Goliath came to him with a physical sword. David went to the battle with Jehovah, with God. God was his sword. God was his strength. God was his salvation. And that's a lesson that we can learn, is to have confidence in the Lord to deliver us, not in any type of man-made or earthly or our own confidence in ourselves. The second lesson that we see is David faced resistance from those who should have supported him. You know, he went to battle and he was going to do things that God wanted him to do, to stand up for the Israelite army, to stand up for God's people. Now, you would think that people would want to support a guy with that courage and with that strength, but they didn't. He had to go against those people. He had resistance in that. We see that from his brother there in verse 28 when it says his older brother Eliab, when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, "Why have you come down? With whom have you left a few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the naughtiness of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." So that's the first resistance that he faced, was his oldest brother. Now remember, David is the youngest of 8, and Eliab is number 1. So there's quite an age difference there. Eliab was quite a bit older. A lot of times, younger brothers tend to look up to older brothers, don't they? We look up to them and we want their approval. We want their recognition. We see things like that. Well, David didn't get that from Eliab. He faced resistance. And sometimes that resistance can turn us away from doing what God wanted to do, but it didn't. Even though he faced resistance, he kept going. He also faced resistance from the king. The king Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you're but a youth." And he's a man of war from his youth. So now David gets resistance from his oldest brother. He also gets resistance from the king of Israel. This guy was supposed to be the head of all the armies, and he said, "You can't go do this." So even though David faced that resistance from those who should have supported him, he kept on the path. He kept doing what he should have done. The third lesson that we see is David took action to solve the problem. In verse 48 and 49, it says, "And it happened when the Philistine rose and went and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran towards the ranks to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took a stone from there and slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead, so the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth." Now here we see David, he had to take action to do it. Now, a lot of times we see people today that they say they have faith, right? We believe, we have faith that God's going to do what he says he's going to do, that God's going to deliver us, God's going to protect us, but they don't really ever back that up with action. And we know from passages like James 2, verse 17, that faith requires action on our part. James 2, verse 17, it says, "Even so, if it does not have works, faith is dead, being by itself. But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith from my works.'" Now I want you to think, was there anybody else in Israel army at that time that they had faith that God was going to deliver them? They might have said that. They might have said, "We have God on our side," but we don't see that kind of faith because not a single one of them took action. But we see the faith from David because he took action. He took action to go kill this Philistine, and he ran to meet it head on. The contrast that we see with all the soldiers and even the king's fear and lack of faith is that they were just hoping and wishing that the problem of Goliath was going to go away. And problems don't just go away. Sometimes we have to take action. God expects us to take action, and that's exactly what David did. So David took action to solve the problem with God's help. When the action is aligned with God's will, it will work. But if you have God's will and no action, nothing's going to happen. If you have action and you don't have God's will, it's probably not going to work out the way you want it to. So the action must be aligned with God's will, and you have to have both of those ingredients. And that's what David showed us, is the action aligned with God's will solve the problem. The fourth lesson that we can see is David gave the glory to God. In verse 45 through 47, "And David said to the Philistine, 'You come to me with sword and spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of Jehovah of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Jehovah will deliver you into my hand this day, and I will strike you and take your head from you and give the bodies of the armies of the Philistines to the birds of the air today and the wild beasts of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this multitude shall know that Jehovah does not save with sword or spear, for the battle is Jehovah's, and he will give you into our hands. So this David, Eliab had just told him, like, I know you're here because of your pride. David wasn't there because of pride. David was there to take care of business and give the honor and glory to God. And that's exactly what he did. He went out to go fight the battle, and he said, God is going to fight this battle. God's going to deliver you into my hand. So God got all the glory, and that's the fourth lesson that we can see for us today. So there's a lot of other lessons that we can really look at, but I think those are some of the key four for us to really see in this event and really take away and what we can learn from this. But the next thing I want to look at is, how does this apply to us today? This event happened thousands and thousands of years ago. We don't go onto battlefields. We don't go with the sword and spear. We don't have this Philistine giant coming out and defying God in front of us and challenging us today, do we? Well, not in a physical sense, but we do face Goliath. So what is the giant that is standing in front of you? Sometimes the problems that we have in our life can feel like this Philistine giant. Sometimes it can feel so overwhelming, this 10-foot tall guy that weighs over 400 pounds and has been trained up from war. Sometimes it feels that way. And sometimes there is a Goliath in front of us. So who is that Goliath? What's that Goliath that you're facing? Is it sin that dominates your mind? Do you have a sin problem in your life that you feel like you just can't get over? There's no way to get around it. There's no way to get past it. Maybe it's fear that stops your obedience. There's something that you know you need to do for God. You can read it in the scriptures. You can see the commandments. But for whatever reason, you're too afraid to take that action. Is that fear the Goliath that's standing in your way? What about past failure that makes you feel unworthy? You ever made mistakes in the past? You ever had resistance from people that you love that should have supported you, like David, that keeps you down and that keeps you from doing what you need to do? Sometimes that can feel like a Goliath, that we can't get past the past failures that we have. Sometimes it's the pressure of culture telling us to stay silent. You think culture wants us to speak out and speak the truth today, or do they want to hear things that they want to hear? Sometimes that pressure can feel overwhelming, and that pressure can feel like Goliath that's staying in our way. So even though we don't face this physical Goliath, this Philistine giant, we do face giants. We do face giants that are hard for us to overcome. So the next step is, how do we overcome the Goliath that's in your life? Well, let's look at a few steps. The first way in how to overcome Goliath, you have to identify what your Goliath is. What is that giant standing in front of you? David named him. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 26, it says, And David spoke to the man and stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the shame from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So David, he identified what was standing in the way. It's this Philistine giant. Who is this guy who's defying the armies of the living God? And that's our first step, is to identify the Goliath, to take the time and to be honest with yourself, to think about, what is the giant that I'm facing? What is the problem and the battle that I'm going against? After you identify that Goliath, the second thing is you got to prepare for battle. Now, we battle spiritual battles today. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 through 17, it tells us how we prepare ourselves for battle. It says, Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the world's rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Therefore take to yourself the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Therefore stand, having your loins girded about with the truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. And above all, take the shield of faith, which with you shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. So here we prepare ourselves with battle, this spiritual battle, by having this armor, having this weaponry, and having the things that are there to prepare us for this battle. So that's the second step, prepare for the battle. The third step, after you've identified Goliath, you prepared for battle, now make sure you're putting your trust in God. And that's what David did in verse 37. When David said, Jehovah who delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, Go, may Jehovah be with you. David had full trust and confidence in God to deliver him through the hand of Goliath. That same God who delivered David against Goliath is the same God that you and I serve today. And he's the same God that will deliver you from your Goliath, whatever Goliath you're facing. Whether it's a sin problem, a physical problem, a past problem, whatever it is, it's the same God that delivered David is the same God that delivers you. If we look in Psalms chapter 20, verse 7, David said, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of Jehovah our God. And David is reminding us to make sure we put our trust and the confidence in the right things. Don't put your trust in yourself. Don't put your trust in worldly riches. Don't put your trust in any earthly or material things that all is going to vanish away. But keep your trust and confidence in God. And He will prepare you and He will help you through that battle. Now the next step is to simply take the next step. Sometimes it's just a matter of continuing to take action. Whatever that next step is for you, you have to put the work in, you have to put in the action. David did that in verse 48. It says, and when he happened, the Philistine rose and went and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the ranks to meet the Philistine. I think it's important for us to remember that David didn't wait. David didn't procrastinate. He wasn't timid. When he saw the battle coming at him, he ran towards the battle, and that's what we need to do as well. When we have a Philistine giant, when we have that giant facing us today, and he's coming to destroy us and to kill us and to harm us, don't be timid. Don't procrastinate. Don't wait around. It's not going to get better with time. It's going to get better with action that aligns with God's word. Get up and run towards that battle and go take care of business. It's time for us to get up and run. Just like David got up and ran. We have to continue to take the next step. Take action and keep working on that battle. And finally, we have to remember to simply keep fighting. Not all giants fall in a day like Goliath did. Not all giants are going to be that quick to overcome, but they will be overcome if you continue to just keep fighting. Jesus told us in Matthew 24, verse 13, but he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. That giant that you're facing today, you may be facing that giant for the rest of your life. And that giant may just be there. And you may have to keep fighting and keep battling and keep taking that next step. But that's exactly what God expects you to do, to keep fighting. Just because you're fighting doesn't mean there's a problem. The problem happens when you stop fighting. And that's what Jesus reminds us of, is endure to the end. Keep going. Keep fighting that fight. God will be with you. Keep your trust in Him. So let's look at those steps to overcome your Goliath again. You have to identify your Goliath. What's the giant that you're facing? Prepare for battle. Make sure you're ready to go in that. Prepare for that spiritual battle. Put your trust in God. Take the next step and keep fighting. So these are the steps of how we can overcome the Goliath that you may be facing today. So I have some challenge questions for you to week, and this is some things that I want you to continue to ponder on, continue to think about, continue to study about, and see how it applies to you. So challenge question number 1. Are you more like Saul and the rest of the Israelite army? Are you waiting and afraid? Or are you more like David, going to move in faith when you come against that Philistine giant? Who are you going to be like, Saul or David? The next question, are you trying to fight your battle with your own strength like Goliath did? Or are you trusting in the Lord like David did? We see the outcome from both. Goliath trusted in his own strength and it failed. David trusted in the strength of God and he was successful. Which one are you going to do? And number 3, what is the stone that you need to throw this week? What specific action aligned with God's will can you take to overcome that Goliath? What's the sin problem that you have, and what's the action you can take to overcome that sin problem? What's the past failure, and what's the action you can take to overcome that past failure? What's the mistake that you're trying to overcome? What is it? What's the stone that you can throw this week to take specific action and to overcome your Goliath? Giants do not fall when we freeze. They fall when we step forward in faith. And that's the step that we need to take, is what's the step in faith that you need to take today to get that giant to fall? So when we look at the story about David versus Goliath, this event that really happened is a lot more than just this children's fairy tale. It's real. It's a historical event. It happened. It's recorded in the Scriptures for us, and it helps build our faith. The same God who delivered David out of the hand of the giant is the same God who can deliver you today. So if you're not a Christian this morning and you have all this sin in your life, This giant of sin is way too big for you to fight on your own. If you're trying to fight this battle of sin, you're just like King Saul and the rest of the Israelite army. There's no way you can overtake it. But Jesus can, and Jesus already did. He already won that battle. So if you haven't become a Christian and you haven't been baptized into Christ, then just let Jesus take over that fight for you. Let Jesus kill that sin in your life. Be baptized into Him and wash away that sin so you can become a new creature. Or if you are a Christian this morning, ask yourself, are you standing in the battlefield, or are you trying to hide away and be timid? Are you prepared and are you taking action? Or are you just waiting for your problem to miraculously go away without taking any action? You have to take action. It's time to step up, time to get to work, go to the battlefield, prepare yourself, trust in God, and take the action that you need to take. Today is not a day for retreat. It's a day to run towards your battle, and God will deliver you to victory. So if you have any problems in this life, if you have any struggles you're trying to deal with, if you have any Goliaths that you're trying to overcome and you need the prayers of the church, then we can help you. We can study with you. We can pray with you. We can help bring your confidence back in God to overcome those problems. Or if you're not a Christian, you haven't been baptized into Christ and would like to do so this morning, then we invite you to come forward, have a seat on the front pew while we stand and sing the song that's been selected.
We hope you enjoyed this teaching from God's Word. If there's anything we can do to help you in your walk with Christ, send us a message at facebook.com/CFCNWA. To find more sermons, look for us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and like our Facebook page. Thanks for listening, and God bless.